Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 51st Cybersecurity Awareness Forum live panel session. Today, we'll explore prioritizing security awareness training among a sea of other corporate training. How much resistance do security awareness managers face when trying to budget, plan, and deploy their training programs, and how do they deal with those obstacles? So, I'm Scott Wright, the CEO and Chief Engagement Officer at ClickArmor, and your host for today's session. If you're a security awareness manager, security professional, or even a business manager who's concerned about security and human vulnerability, you've come to the right place. And we have a great panel of experts today and a very engaged audience ready for a fun and informative discussion. And the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum is an open collaboration group for anyone who's passionate about security awareness and human risk management. And the CSAF series is brought to you by ClickArmor, the employee cyber confidence builder. If you're looking for a more engaging employee cybersecurity training experience and a more effective way to train staff, it's easy to deploy, we'd love to talk to you. And I'll share more about ClickArmor later at the end of this session. So let's get started. But before we introduce our panelists for today, just a reminder for attendees to enter into the chat if you can where you're joining us from today. It helps us understand the international makeup of our audience and also encourages people to get used to typing stuff in. So we like to see a good active chat. And our format, if you haven't been with us before, is to have 3 open questions during the hour for our panel and 3 poll questions for everyone to contribute to. And we'll see what insights come out at the end of the session. So now, as usual, let's meet our awesome group of panelists for our discussion on prioritizing security awareness among a sea of corporate training requirements. Ryan, would you like to introduce the panel for us?
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott. Good to see everyone. Happy November. Can't believe it's already that time of year. But yeah, joining us today on the panel, we have Marcella. She is the Security Education and Awareness Specialist for Lockheed Martin Canada, where she leads security training, compliance training, and awareness initiatives, as well as conducts security audits. So welcome to the panel, Marcella.
Thanks.
Next, we've got Thea. She's a behavioral neuroscientist with over 10 years of experience in studying how the biology of our brains can influence our behavior. In her current role as Director of Research for Praxis Security Labs, Thea now works on applying her experience to cybersecurity scenarios surrounding the human element. So welcome back, Thea. Good to see you. And joining us again is Teresa. She's the founder of Popsicle, an emerging cybersecurity awareness company designed for kids. She's an award-winning children's music singer-songwriter. In March, she was a keynote speaker at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, speaking on how cybersecurity promotes gender equality. She's worked in cyber since 2014 as a senior technical writer and user experience designer. Great to have you back, Teresa. And I'm Ryan Healy-Ogden. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Solutions here at ClickArmor. I have a passion for education and awareness and all things cybersecurity. I'll hand it back to Scott and we'll kick it off.
Thank you very much, Ryan, and thanks everybody. Just to do a quick roundtable, where people are joining us from today. I'm in Ottawa. Ryan's in Ramara, Ontario. We've got people from Minnesota, St. John's, Newfoundland, Clearwater, Florida, Chicago, Devon, and Edmonton, Alberta, to name a few. So I'm going to share my screen again just for a moment and let people know a little bit about what we're actually doing in the session today. And what we usually do here is we record these sessions and we take transcriptions, we make blog posts from them, and we also generate a quarterly CISO report on security awareness that a lot of people find useful. It distills the insights from these sessions. So feel free to grab that and also to join our community website, which is at members.cybersecurityawarenessforum.com. And love to see you there. You can actually get more of the recorded videos and invitations to these sessions. So with that, let's move on to our topic today. So when it comes to prioritizing and making room for security awareness training, we often see a lot of resistance. I have, at least in clients that I've done work with and that ClickArmor works with, we see a lot of what we call training fatigue among different programs. And sometimes the executives actually don't want employees to get too much cybersecurity training. So we're kind of in a bit of a dilemma. We're competing against things like privacy and workplace safety and anti-harassment, all these things. Not that they're not important, but how do we actually raise the, level of importance of cybersecurity awareness to the level it should be? So we've got so many topics to, compete with. We'll talk a little bit about how we do that and what's working, what's not. But we're also in a different dimension looking at other kinds of communication that, again, executives don't want to overload their employees with. We've got internal newsletters, bulletins, policy announcements, surveys, and performance reviews. All these things demand time from employees as well. So, again, we're just trying to figure out what's the best way for security awareness managers to bring these things to the forefront. And so as we start, I'm going to first launch our poll. I mentioned I'm going to be doing 3 polls, and you may see these pop up depending on if the timing is right. It may or may not pop up between our panel discussions, but I'm going to launch this one now just so that we can get this going, and would love for people to put their responses in, and then we'll review the insights from these later on. But I guess the first thing I want to do is open things up with an open question to the panel, and actually a couple of questions. But also the panel's free to take it wherever they want, go back to some of the things I've said earlier, etc. But I'll just start it out with, how does management view security awareness compared to other corporate training in either your current organization or other organizations you've seen? And what else does security awareness compete with in terms of priorities? So if panelists want to weigh in on this, I ask you to just raise your hand, and we'll try and do it in order of interest. If not, I'll just pick somebody at random and we'll get going. So Thea usually has an idea on these kinds of things, so I'll ask Thea if she has what she's seen.
Are we going for me? Okay,
I'm going to you, yes.
that's all good. So I was thinking about this question, and actually, I'm not so much on the ground with people about other kinds of training that they would normally need to incorporate. But I think one of the major issues that we suffer from is that they don't understand the purpose of it, because you don't necessarily get out of security awareness training the value that you would necessarily get out of other kinds of training. So, for example, if you were doing safety training, for example, you can understand there's a very direct link between I trained somebody not to put a nail in their hand, and now they're not going to put a nail in their hand. And I can see the outcome of that is very negative. Whereas a lot of the outcomes that we're trying to train against are fairly abstract. And actually, this is something that I've argued that for a long time, is that, if you are good at cybersecurity, nothing happens. And so you go to these people and you say, well, what did I get? And you go, well, nothing. And they go, well, you don't need that much money next year.
No, but nothing is good. Nothing's good.
Nothing is good. Nothing is something. And I think that's really where the core of that comes from. And even the idea that we as security professionals have to discuss it as a competition. How do we compete with other kinds of training? You need this training. This is necessity. This is protecting people. Also, I mean, it does speak to us as our ability to communicate that with other people that aren't us, has maybe not gone as well as we'd hoped. And maybe that's something that we need to start reassessing. How do we communicate the importance of what we're doing to people that aren't living in this industry? And I'd love to hear other thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, mine's a bit of a different perspective, but I typically, hear a lot of pushback of, I guess the way to frame it is people don't see security training as part of their ecosystem as like a normal item, right? They see it as like this fringe item that's like maybe too technical for users, or we only have to do it once a year, or it's just a compliance piece because it's like, our insurance, states it. It's very different when an organization has a different, kind of view, and they come and they say, we need security awareness training because we want to improve our culture. Right. So then all of a sudden they're understanding that it should just be no different than the fire drill and the women's training and the health and safety. But I think one of the biggest roadblocks is, for whatever reason, security, awareness training is kind of put on this pedestal where it's like this separate, scary entity. And then there's all these, things about ROI and how is it going to help us? And when nothing happens, how do we continue to spend money on it? I mean, those are valid points too, but for some reason, it's very different than just that standard training. And I don't know if it's just a time thing because we've been doing fire drills for 100 years, right? And we know not to put nails in our hands by now because it hurts. But but we still don't somehow understand the consequences of business email compromise costing, a business, $50 million or more, or their livelihood. Or, what Teresa does is trying to protect children online from, all sorts of crazy threats, that are out there, but we're not understanding the direct connections. So I think that's one of my biggest observations of how training fits in with others.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, Ryan. And I'm glad you brought in Teresa's perspective, because you probably have a different way of looking at this question. You're not really dealing with a corporate environment so much, that I know of anyway. Maybe you can explain if you do, but you probably have other things that are competing for mind share in the audience you're trying to reach as well.
I mean, yes. And so I look at it in a couple ways because I do have a full-time job outside of Popsicle. So I recently went through all this other training, the
Ah,
anti-bribery and
Mhm.
anti-bribery, corruption, the anti-harassment, and some other things. And I don't kind of live in the world because I work for a fintech, very large fintech. So I don't kind of live in the world where I would be bribed or corrupted. I'm not going to have no plans on harassing people. But we just had National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, so it's very top of mind. And then in January is Data Privacy Week. So again, the company is thinking about how can we continue cybersecurity awareness, like without it just being 1 month and globally, how can we expand this throughout the whole year? So we have to just be very mindful. And then I think it's really important to also acknowledge that the security awareness that you maybe get at work is something that can be translated at home. So making that connection. So if you have a family, and in my world, kids, then how can you use, what you're learning at work for home? So there's a lot of, like you mentioned before, business email compromise. And then I have a new work number for my phone. And I have been getting so many scam calls just on my work number. So how can we learn from, what the training is at work into our home environment, and then teaching kids how to be safe and understand what those phishing emails or phishing calls look like?
yeah, great points. And finally, Marcella, do you have any thoughts on this whole
I
idea?
do. Yeah, I feel so privileged to work where I do because we have a lot of compliance training that everybody has to go through either annually or biannually. And security has never been anything but a priority. So every new hire gets, their security onboarding, which I do personally. We do personalized briefings depending on, if they're working on a specific program, if they're handling certain types of information, on the rare occasions where something may happen with a team, I'll come in and I'll do a security briefing for, increasing awareness, with in terms of infractions. I think probably my most favorite one is one that we put together. It's been running now for a couple of years because we have a lot of university co-op students. And we realized that these students are coming in, and not only is it their first time working in the defense industry, but it's probably their first time working in an office environment, right? Where they have to actually take into account, the security aspect of it, and, things not to do that they may, like for anybody else that's been working in the industry, in any industry that involves security, for more than a year or two, they've already taken that into account when we forget these things, right? So I created a briefing to really say like, hey, welcome to working, in an office environment. Here are things you need to know. So I feel pretty special listening now that, in some cases, security is not prioritized. And I proudly say this in every single one of my briefings. For us specifically, security is at the foundation of our programs. Security is at the foundation of everything we do. And especially with co-op students, I do try to do the connection of like, it's not just at work.
Mhm.
I preach about the fact that the need to know, need to access criteria is my favorite security mantra. And I completely geek out. And I give them personal examples, right? Like I talk about how, let's say like their credit card got stolen, or if they're sharing their credit card information online, I'm like, you've got to do it with somebody who meets that need to know, need to access criteria, because otherwise to them is like, okay, well, it's, well, Teresa, like you said, like I'm not in a situation where I'm likely to be bribed, and I have no intentions of harassing people. But if you make it personal and find something that they can relate to, they might go, okay, I need to pay attention to where I'm putting my email address or who I'm interacting with, through LinkedIn and stuff like that.
Well, it's also wise though. You're in an environment and in an industry where the targets will be outside of the safety of your organization, typically, right? Because you guys are so secure. Like again, hypothetically, but if I was going to social engineer someone at Lockheed Martin, I wouldn't be trying to, get through the network. I'd be working off of their social media. I'd be, looking at all their personal mistakes and to see how you could leverage them, right? So, I mean, for certain industries like yours, but there's a lot of sensitive information, I think you have to have that diligence of being like, this needs to happen outside of the office. This is not, again, a fringe topic that we only talk about at work. Security and being mindful of what you share and how you share it should be an everyday thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And actually, you got me thinking about something else, Marcella, and that is quality, right? So a lot of programs, especially in aerospace and manufacturing, have quality programs where employees get trained on quality. And interestingly, I was involved in a quality program when I was just barely out of university and as a co-op student even at one point. And it was a quality improvement program because the organization had had some complaints and problems, lost contracts and things. And what I learned about the quality improvement program really resonates with me when I'm working in cybersecurity, because security is really just another aspect of quality. I mean, if you're creating code that's vulnerable, that's not good quality, right? And so I think there's a lot of alignment there, and it's really obviously important for aerospace and manufacturing companies to make that a priority as well. So really interesting comment there. Tia.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly say, like, that was fascinating, Marcella, actually, to hear you talk about that, because what I can hear also from you and Teresa is specifying your targets for training. So we're not giving everybody some sort of generalized training that somebody's told us is good for everybody. You're like, I treat people specifically, right, based on what they need. And we're always told also in the industry that there's no money for that, right? We don't have time for that. We don't have energy for that. But actually, you need that, because if you don't have that, what are you actually doing? Why am I getting training on, for example, I remember I at the last corporate job I had hours and hours of training on insider trading, and I had no shit. I had no shame. I was like, well, okay, like, this is great information, but like, you want to pay me for this? This is great, but it's not relevant for me. And there are other, and that's the difference as well, as we're talking about compliance versus training. It's not the same thing. Ticking a box, and ticking a box can actually, training wise, actually be very, very negative. It can make people quite resentful.
Yeah, and I think that not one size fits all is a good point too, because like if you hit people with like technical security control training that's meant for just like developers, but you give that to normal people, and it becomes confusing. It's too much. What are they going to do with that information? If they can't do anything with that information, you're wasting their time.
Yeah.
Teresa?
And it's the reason why Popsicle has different messaging for kids versus parents versus industry people, because everyone has a different style of learning, but also has a different level of education in cybersecurity awareness. And I've been giving presentations on kind of getting rid of our cybersecurity technical jargon and bringing it back to these more bite-sized, consumable, easy to understand pieces. Because what does cyber really mean? So I've been giving this presentation. I did it at MWise in Denver and Secure World Denver, and kind of just breaking down what these different words mean. What does cyber hygiene really mean to the average person? Or how can we bring a term like that we know as industry professionals, but make it useful in our policies or standards or procedures, or bringing it back home. So
Yeah, I think
again, goes back to that quality and making it, particular for different groups.
And not over explaining. I think it's kind of just what the nail you hit on hit so hard, perfectly on the head. Again, like I always pick on fire drills, but like I don't need to know how the fire alarm works, right? I just need to know if I hear that fire alarm, I need to know what to do. So it's like sometimes we may be confusing users or giving them too much technical information and not really then focusing on, you know, the actual message and what they need to be learning.
Yeah. Or like in the office where they say, we don't need to burn down the office to
When
get people to learn that fire
I
is bad.
famously quote, yeah, Dwight in The Office when he lights the office on fire to teach them how to get out of the office. But yeah, we don't need to give people real viruses on their computer in order to teach them how to prevent them.
Yep. So I don't know if the panelists or attendees have a lot of insight into this, but I thought this would be an interesting question. You know, what is the most likely thing to be impacted by other priorities or policy limitations when it comes to activities for security awareness training? You know, and I've got notifications, training time allocation per employee, content relevance, we talked just about now, and foundational training and assessments, things that we need to get done, or follow-up communications, reminders, remediation, communication, and action. So just want to launch that poll and see how people are feeling about that. And we'll move on to our next question, which is, what resourcing and planning differences are there between security awareness training and other training programs that management should be briefed on and appreciate? You know, we could chat about what this means, but the actionable thing that I want to get to from this panel session is, you know, what kinds of things does management really need to understand that makes us more of a priority than what we're getting, for example? Maybe not the highest priority when you, depending on what your environment is, but up there, right? Or tied for the highest. So just want to start the discussion around that. And I guess from my own experience, I think what you'll normally see is management's trying to be fair. It's like trying to be fair and balanced, you know, like, well, we've got to do our harassment training, but we also have to do our privacy training, and we also have to do, you know, this and cyber too, right? So everybody sort of gets equal weighting. But do we have a way that we can let management know how important this is, or on even on a different dimension, why this should be something that even management and staff have to spend more time on? Ryan?
I would use case studies that are industry specific. So again, like if you're in aerospace, for example, what else has been happening in aerospace and security that could be prevented by, you know, training and controls? Stats and numbers and figures, I think, are important for management. You know, not to necessarily then downplay other, you know, types of training. Again, to Thea's point, like, you know, she has to take training around insider trading. Okay, well then maybe we compare that and say, well, you know, how often is that happening to the organization, and what are the, you know, the ramifications, including like monetary damage, versus what, you know, what's the potential to a cyber attack and you know, no longer being able to do business. And I think so being able to not just say it's important, you know, everyone gets links, everyone's clicking things like that, those things don't work anymore. I think the proof is in the data, case studies. That's my best approach, just to be able to show, again, nothing's less important, you know, but we have to rank it somehow. And I think the, you know, real world examples would be the best way to do so.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess the one thing that I like to try to point out to clients as well is that it seems like, well, I think everybody can probably agree, cyber threats are much more dynamic than threats from fire or health and safety or some other types of corporate training that you might have to do. Yeah, those are really important, and people do need to take the foundational training. They do need to be reminded, but threats are changing so quickly. I think that's one reason why I thought this would be an interesting topic to raise, because management doesn't always hear that, and they don't know how to actually compare these two different views. Thea.
Yeah, and I think this has been a very positively intentioned approach by the industry, which is explaining to management, so C-suite board members, for example, like this could happen to you, right? And then we give them the frightening numbers of what literally could happen to them out of an email, for example, or what could happen to them out of whatever. That is so out of reach for a lot of businesses that it's ridiculous. It's so out of their belief system. And also we've perpetrated this idea that it's kind of this 1 in a million chance thing that could happen to you, but it won't if you do this thing. And actually, I think cybersecurity is a lot more, the threat is consistent. You don't necessarily get nuked, you can get bruised. You can get, sort of wounds that are less nuclear and they're still as damaging. And I feel like maybe we've misrepresented that to management in the sense that it's almost like asking them to bet on a lottery ticket. And that's really not what they're investing in cybersecurity. What we're investing in is resilience against input, against outcome. We're not asking them to place a bet on whether this will happen or not, which is basically what they've been coming at us with for a long time, particularly in terms of budget or whatever. Oh, have we got any money left over? Let's bet on this. And then that's not really what it is. It needs to be a consistent and I think integrated part of budgeting, and it needs to be an integrated part of everyday business. Everyday business it needs to be. And it's not just or you might get unlucky one day and suddenly you owe some ransomware group $50 million. This is a very real threat, and it's an everyday threat for everybody. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's true, and I can see like, oh, you're standing there in front of your CEO going, look what can happen if you don't give me the budget to do what I need to do. And I completely agree with it, but I think it's well intentioned, but it's maybe ill informed, because I think we've been doing that for 10 years and it's not really gotten us anywhere. We need to
Yeah.
find a different way of communicating this to people, because I don't think it's now. Do I know what that is? Unfortunately, not.
But you're working on it, so maybe.
Well, I just encourage people in the chat to, and lo and behold, Tony posts something in the chat. So just love to hear the attendees' ideas around this stuff too. So I think Tony's saying, organizations are still not taking risk management seriously, and whether it's intentionally or just because they don't really understand it well enough. But we've got a lot of different standards that we're looking at and making mandatory. But yeah, cybersecurity sometimes isn't even mandatory for some organizations. So that's something I think we really should take a look at. Marcella, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just thinking, Thea, you had mentioned earlier about the whole, like, what happens if we are, if we're compliant with security requirements, it's like nothing happens. And that's something that we do with like our senior leadership, where we basically demonstrate that, right? So like in metrics, so we show every month, how many security violations and what type of violations occurred, if any. But we also show them how much training that we do that month. So whether we did co-op training or program training, whether we're training our own security officers, and the goal of that is to go, look how many people we trained. Look how we had no violations, or we had minor violations. Okay, so next month, maybe we'll do more training or more increased awareness on, for example, not sending out email attachments, right? Or the risks behind them. So we continue showing the managers, at a higher level, saying, look how nothing continues to happen. This is a good thing. 0 is a good number to have, right? Because we've taught them enough that it becomes part of their language, their culture, that when there's a security violation, it's not necessarily the individuals that will be affected by it, but it's their wallets, right? When it comes down to like, our organization, a data spill or, anything that can happen, it could cause delays that will, like make the company lose millions of dollars. So when we're talking millions, that makes, a point that drives it home to the SLTs. For the individuals, we don't talk about that. We don't go like, oh, the company could be in trouble. We tell them, you could go to jail. You could be fined personally thousands of dollars. So don't take stuff home that you shouldn't, right? So yeah, so for us, we just continue preaching the whole, look how we did nothing this month, right? Like there's no violations. We had to do 0 investigations. So that was good news, right?
Yeah, you were the champion of an empty report, right?
That's
like
right.
That's yeah.
That sounds like a great meme for Security Awareness Month next year.
Yeah, right. And this month, I'd like to show you nothing.
Right? And nothing is good. And also, it's the loss of reputation. So anytime I see a company having a security breach because it was something dumb or just, a lot of bad hackers or whatever, that's a company I don't want to do business with.
Yeah.
And so, that's not something your company wants to deal with, is people thinking badly about you. And then they are going to tell somebody else, because I give presentations about passwords and multi-factor authentication. And if there's a company that, like a password manager company, that I don't want to recommend, I'm not going to recommend it.
Mhm.
So that gets filtered down to other people, and they know that there was a incident, and then they're going to look somewhere else. So
Yeah.
there is that added cost or loss of profit to a company, because I'm either saying, don't try that company, or I'm not going to use that company. So there's also the loss of reputation that I think is really important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I still pick on Home Depot. I mean, that breach was in 2010, but it was famously one of the first bigger breaches in Canada of data and privacy, right? So it's still a reference point, 14 years later, that
Mhm.
they didn't protect data. And another thing
Yep.
just to mention is you said, you could go to jail. Well, yeah, CISOs are now, being held liable for, and that's the leadership, being held liable. So as an organization, would you like your CISO to go to jail, or would
Yeah.
you like to give them the tools to prevent the unfortunate and the inevitable?
I
But
have two.
Yeah.
what it is, I'm sorry, Scott.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it is. It's translating, and as Marcella said, that's what matters to them, is what's coming out of their pocket.
Mhm.
It's translating the risk to what they actually care about.
Or losing your security clearance, for example, Marcella, like
For
in NIR,
example,
right?
I'm looking
If you lose your clearance, you're done. You can't like, if that's your
Yeah.
role and you work in aerospace and you lose your clearance, like, where are you going to work, right?
Basket
No
weaving.
one's going to.
Yeah. So I have a couple of quick comments. One is really important because it reminds me some of this discussion of a conversation I had with an advisor or mentor 15 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago, before I created ClickArmor. And, we're talking about going to market, and he says, there's only two things that I've ever seen that sold security. And we're talking about selling security investment to management. And those two things have been fear and compliance. Which was interesting. I thought, well, we could maybe talk about risk, and people might actually be proactive, but it's really, really tough to sell based on risk. And that's just my observation. I think it's important, but I also think Thea's point about saying, or actually, I think it was Marcella, about our ROI, or showing some kind of return through correlation, right? So you could say you've correlated your training to the incidents. And if the incidents go down and you look at the training has been done, that actually takes work and that takes investment. So to be able to even spend the time and associating the incidents with the training is not trivial, and especially for larger organizations. It actually might be a little easier for some larger organizations where you've got the tools that will feed the data and do some analysis on it. But medium-sized organizations often don't have that ability to sift through all the data and provide that correlation. So I just wanted to say, I think it's really a great point that we can use that correlation in a positive way, and that is kind of an ROI indicator. But we have to recognize that even that takes a bit of investment itself to make it happen. So great discussion. We have one more poll question. I'm going to launch. I think just start this one. And it's basically an interesting kind of a data point type of question is how often, there we are. How often do planned security awareness training activities get impacted by other priorities? So I'd love to hear people's input on that. If you're involved in an organization where you can see this happening, do you always manage to get your security awareness plans implemented in terms of either communications or training or even follow-up, or do they get disrupted in favor of other priorities? And has that happened once or twice or more than twice a year? I'd say you probably don't even remember. If it's been more than twice, well, let's just say that's not good. So love to hear people's thoughts on that. And our final question is, what after actions from security awareness training are different from other corporate training programs? So I have a view on this, but I'll maybe Ryan might have some thoughts on this to start things off. Oh, you're muted, I think.
Yes, I am. Yeah, I think, having, I think the number one thing I get asked for is I need a solid report to stand on is what security awareness managers, always come back and say, and that's valid. And that leads us into, the ROI or the compare and contrast, but again, in a lot of different training, it's just an assumption. If, you issue training, it's done. No one comes and follows up and says, okay, now that you did your WMIS training or your health and safety training, like I need to see a solid report because I'm gonna enter that in the budget. And we might do it next year. We might not. So there's a lot of like carryover and uncertainty, I find, that the security awareness managers are kind of stuck with versus people who are training in other fields that they just know that, okay, I'm done this year and I know I'm going to do it next year and I don't have to go fight for my budget, to do health and safety training or, harassment training or, diversity training. I know it's just going to be done. So I think that that level of uncertainty is one of the things I see that they have to deal with more so after the fact, of just, yeah, it worked. Trust me, it worked. And please give me more money so I can expand it and do more of it. It's kind of a constant uphill battle where it shouldn't be. And I think that's the reason why we're having this whole conversation.
All right. Tia.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Ryan. I think as well, you have to think about why you're doing a security awareness training, because if you're doing it purely for compliance reasons, there is no follow-up. You've ticked your boxes, the report is in, and you've achieved your tick and you've done what you were supposed to do. And you basically, what we call it in my company, we call it CYA, cover your ass. Training, which is not the same as actually, but if you're looking as a security manager, I think to actually implement things, and that maybe that's not just training, it's also, for example, security champions, it's engagement, it's whatever you're doing. You need to know if it worked. You can't just keep implementing it because it's not guaranteed. There are so many variances based on your industry, based on your organization size, based on what are your risks? They don't look the same for everybody in every industry across every branch of organization. And I think the follow-up really, it's very difficult for a vendor to come in and say, we can blanket follow up your training. We can give you, we can understand exactly what everybody needs to do going forward. I think you have internally, that responsibility is internal, and it needs to be that you need to ask the question of whether what you're doing is valuable or not. And the only way you do that is trial and error. Try things out, try and come up with a measure of whether it's worked or not, and then go back and reassess. And I think that's really the only system that we can do. If you're talking about follow-up and you're genuinely interested in improving security and culture, that's really the only way to go. And I think otherwise, if you're just interested in compliance, like there's a pointless question. I've got my form, here it is.
Yeah, good point. I guess nobody else has their hands up, so I'll take another little stab at this, and that is that I think sometimes when you look at all the other things competing with security awareness training, there's a risk element to each of those if you're not compliant, right? But how often does the risk of actual non-compliance from a risk point of view come into vision, right? Is it more about getting the check mark, or is it about the actual risk? So as Thea said, we need to kind of look at how management looks at risk, because management is actually pretty in tune with other kinds of risks, right? Like financial risks and operational risks and health and safety risks to a lot of extent. But we really, I think, need to be putting more valuable reporting to management, and it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. You can't get the data if you don't get the allocation or the investment to do the metrics in the first place or to do the training. And so that's a challenge, and I don't know if we have an answer for that, but that's kind of one of the things that Thea's comment made me think of. Teresa, any thoughts?
From Popsicle's business perspective, we always offer follow-ups on presentations and stuff that we give or to our customers. So, I know that, because I've built that relationship with either the company or the family, that they're able to come back to me. I don't know that we do that so well at a corporate level. I'm thinking about the company that I work for, and what kind of metrics are we going to have after our security awareness program? So as soon as I get off that, I'm going to ask, because I don't know that we have any metrics other than, somebody may have clicked a like button on an article that I wrote, maybe. But what else are they doing to ensure that, yes, we've taken the security awareness training, yes, we had some activities, but what next? So I don't know if we have any analytics behind that. That's something that I think about for myself. But yeah, I'm hoping that we have some better
Yeah,
data around that.
cool. Marcella?
Yeah, I was just thinking it's difficult sometimes because for those of us that are immersed in the security world, and we completely geek out on security, we live and breathe it. Like I remember, Teresa, I hope you appreciate this. I was teaching my 5-year-old son about the need to know criteria because he loudly said to me when we were out for ice cream that he had to go to the bathroom for number 2. So I said, honey, the people that are serving at the counter don't necessarily need to
Need
know.
to know.
I need to know, but you don't need to. So let's keep that, pull me aside or just say, Mama, we got to go to the bathroom. Then let's talk about that, right? Public does not need to know. So, and I walked off like giggling to myself, like, look at me, can't take the security hat off. But it's difficult when you have either newcomers or people who go through the security training, on a regular basis, to not think of it as compliance training. They're thinking of it as like, okay, Marcella's checked off that box for this year, like whoop-de-doo, I can carry on my way. And it's hard because I think of ways of improving our training and our briefing sessions and our awareness initiatives. And it's kind of hard to judge whether it's working or not, unless you have 0 violations. Then you're like, well, obviously we're doing something right. But if we want to get the impact from the people who've shown up, right, from their perspective, and we send out surveys and they may not necessarily answer because they're like, blah, 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 I have bigger things to do, I have more important things to do. So they may not necessarily answer the survey, or they'll answer when they want to complain because it was an hour long and I talked too much. So you may not get a clear view as to whether they're finding any benefits from it, right? Whether they're finding it's helping them versus, yeah, she scared me because I don't want to go to jail. So that's one of the things that I struggle with in getting a clear impact as to what was beneficial for them.
Cool.
Yeah, I was
Ryan.
just thinking you gave me something to think about there combined with Thea. It's Thea always makes a great point about training needs to be personalized, right? Because we need to
Mhm.
activate that individual at their level. And Teresa mentioned it, they're learners of all different types and styles, right? So I think one thing we could all do better is getting individual feedback, because security is so personal in a sense, right? Because everybody looks at it different, everybody acts differently with it. Some people have emotional responses to those threatening emails, some people just laugh it off, right? So how are people consuming your training, and what do they actually think about it? Could go a long way in helping not only craft that better program, as Marcella does, and that's her passion, right? But it might also help the ammunition for the people that are going up to the senior executives, and to try and get more funding, additional funding, extended funding, a more broad program, by saying, look, this is what the people are saying, this is how it's actually hitting home, and this is how it's like personally connecting. And then hearing stories like we all share these great stories about how you told your your son about security awareness in a way, right? I'm always proud to say, I go to the Legion and I speak to the gentlemen there about what they can do in their retirement age to protect themselves. And Teresa, you've developed an entire platform to help children try and navigate this madness, right? Thea's trying to figure it out from a psychological perspective. We're all so entrenched in it, but maybe sometimes we're not asking the non-IT person, the non-technical person, so how did it help you and how does it translate to your daily life? Because if we start to understand that more and we start to get those perspectives, we might be able to paint a better picture for everyone, and it might normalize things a little faster. Because again, yeah, like Marcella said, we're all geeks and we love this. So it's like, I'll talk about it. Like I'll make a joke when like my garage sticks a little, you know, even though I unlock it, it still sticks and you can't get it open. I'm like, that's my two-factor authentication, right? Like I make, you know, so you know, it's always in our world, but like, you know, most people don't know what that means or would laugh at that joke. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you make a great point, and I think Marcelo makes an excellent point about when we're talking about you need to measure. And it's great. You can do a survey, for example, you get the feedback. What do you do with it then? You've measured it. How do you interpret that? And it's a really excellent point. And I feel like we've got to a point where we get to the point where we're like, we need to measure, and then we get the measurements, and then we're like, okay, but what do we do with it now? And we don't really know what to do with that now. And that's really where I think we need to push the thing. I also think that this is something that I hear cybersecurity professionals complain about all the time, which is their need to be able to apply things to reality. It's like we can pontificate all we like. How do I actually use this in my everyday job? And they almost bully themselves over it because they're not able to come out of that. But I actually think that's an enormous benefit, and it's something that I really appreciate working in the field with other professionals, is the need to take these theoretical concepts and actually try and tunnel them and put them into something that has a realistic value in today's internet interactions and online interactions. So Ryan, like don't bully yourself over that. It's true. Like I mean, like it's great. It's great. We can sit here and discuss all we like. What do we actually do with it? And I think it's great. We need to embrace that. Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. I think Tony actually has a comment, so I'm going to ask him to just speak. I want to see if I can allow him to talk. So here we are, Tony. Hopefully you can speak now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks for joining.
Great. First of all, nice to meet everyone there. I've had relative success by really just making this an HR issue. And so building relationships with HR has taken me a long way in a new role. And it's really just to say, hey, you have these other 5 mandated trainings. This is also mandated training. And how to help them explain it is there's a risk for the organization for every level of training that they don't complete. Just make this the 6th one that's an issue if they don't complete it. And you still get pushback, but at least it's not IT or a security person who's really pushing this. If it's coming from HR, then it's a requirement that the entire organization has to complete. Now, to convince the C-suite of allowing that, that's probably a little bit more direct conversation with them. I'm not at that table or at that place to do that. So when I have to relay this to my senior management, I always use their children or their grandchildren as an example. And that is, imagine your child is getting ready to go to college and they're 18 and they go to get a loan if they need one. And they're like, yeah, you already owe $200,000. Well, somebody snatched their identity when they were 4 or 5 years old. And so sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. But I think really for folks in my role as an information security officer is really just to build the relationship with HR and ask them to take on the representation of this. And I've been relatively successful. I started a new role at a university this year, and I've treated it like that. And I've been given a lot of leeway to do different things. And I appreciate that leeway, that I've been given. But I'm working with another organization now. They have never had security training. They don't have cybersecurity insurance. And so they're really exposed. And so now working with them just to say, hey, I can't tell you how to run your business. All I can do is make recommendations to you. And they see the need, they see the seriousness of it, but they always put, well, we can't afford this, we can't afford that. I was like, look, don't spend the money. Amazon has free training. At least start doing something for cybersecurity. And so, but I think working with HR departments is really one of the biggest ways to go to get things done, because HR has to sign off on these other 5 mandatory trainings that are required. Just put it on HR's back. They build the better relationships, and they're better at holding people accountable than I ever will be as an information security officer. And thanks for letting me share.
No, I really appreciate that comment, Tony,
Yeah.
because it's in line with things that I have believed myself and tried to promote in many client discussions, but it's often not that well received. And I think it could be because people are actually afraid of what the IT executives or the CISO even wants to control, right? And so I think it's a matter of visibility and optics, really. But I really believe that you're right, that we need to work more closely for sure with HR and even have them be the face of it sometimes to make it more impactful to people. Thanks a lot for joining us on that, Tony. I'm going to start wrapping things up because we're just a couple minutes away. But I'm going to start with sharing our poll results. Thanks, Ryan, for getting all those things into the deck in time. So just reviewing our question one, what other programs do you feel compete the most with security awareness training and communication time budgets and mindshare? So a few different things competing: privacy training, anti-harassment, anti-discrimination, ethics and code of conduct, and then a few others that are, less in competition. It's interesting that, these things are not all weighted the same. And so that could be a function of, our small data set that we have here. But I think it's interesting to see it's not an overwhelming number of other priorities that we should be dealing with. So I'll leave that for people to comment on. We only have a couple of minutes, so I'll just go to these other, and then I'll let each of the panel have a quick wrap up comment. The second poll question was, what's most likely to be impacted by other priorities or policy limitations? And number one was training time allocation per employee, which that doesn't surprise me too much, but there are certainly a lot of other obstacles that come in the way. And then question number three, how often do planned security awareness training activities get impacted? And the most common response was once a year. There were a few with twice and more than twice. But it's good that it hasn't been a disaster, but I think there's still clearly room for improvement here. So I'll leave one last roundtable input for people. And Tony, if you're still available and on, why don't you take a shot at any comments on what you've seen today?
I'm so sorry, I muted.
That's okay. Yeah.
I think what I've seen, I haven't been a part of the conversation, in a while. I think what I've seen is just one, the intelligence that's still in the field, that all of you are a valuable resource. But I think in terms of the poll, I think training notifications is one of the biggest things that I've had to deal with, mainly because of red tape and bureaucracy of how many messages they actually want to go out to organizations or to, the company. But, other than that, I think we still have a long way to go. I think that there's still a breach where when people hear about cybersecurity attacks and then the belief that it won't be them. And I think that's the big part of the issue, that they won't pay attention. I think when we don't take the time to teach our kids these things right now, I'm dealing with identity theft for my daughter who just entered college. She's in her sophomore year. I'm already dealing with it.
Wow.
Luckily I had already had some identity protection set up for her, but the IRS did an outstanding job of catching this, but still she's 18 years old dealing with identity theft, which means and we were clear the previous year. I've got colleagues who I work with who have to get a PIN number every year for the IRS as well for their 7-year-old and their 10-year-old because of their children's identity being stolen. So I think from a parental level up to a government level, I still see that we have a long way to go, and I'll end there.
That's great. I actually think that's a great example to use with management and executives, because they probably all have had cases where either themselves or some of their family have had identity theft issues, and they know what a pain it is to deal with. And you can multiply that when you're at the corporate level. So Thea, I'll give you a chance to respond once.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's maybe one of the messages that comes from our conversation that we've had here today, is that, we're talking about corporate security, cybersecurity on a corporate level, but actually talking about cybersecurity on a corporate level, even into the people that are in charge of the corporation, doesn't really work. And that we need to bring it down to the level of what is the actual impact on people and youth specifically. So not only perhaps training needs to be translated into value, but also risk ratio, and depending on who we're talking to.
Excellent. Marcella?
I think for me, the polls were a little bit tricky to answer, but I think the one that I thought of that was like, oh, definitely this what impacts me the most. And it's for the employees themselves to allocate their time, right? Because aside from the onboarding where it's mandatory, they get told by HR, Tony, I hope you appreciate that. HR lets them know before their start date. They're like, okay, on your first week of work, on this day you get your HR onboarding, on this day you get your security onboarding. So they already have a heads up that we're coming in. But after that, once they've hit the ground running and they're working on program stuff and they've got deliverables and they know that deliverables means money, saying, hey, I need to pull you out of your work for an hour for this briefing. They're like, I've got back-to-back meetings, maybe in about 3 weeks, right? So having to squeeze them in there is a challenge occasionally.
Yep, for sure. Ryan?
I just think that, my overall thought, from all these great comments and everything, so thank you very much, everyone, is just, I guess, finding a way to just normalize the security training and make it the same as any other piece of training we do. So Tony's advice about making sure HR is involved, absolutely. Hearing about one-on-one conversations, and I wish more companies were like what Marcella describes that she gets to work at, right? Because I get to deal with a lot of security awareness managers in my role, and not many of them love their job and love their company. Many of them love what they do, and they want to try and enact that, and they want to try and see that sea of change, but maybe the industry needs more standardized practices, that like Lockheed Martin can show other companies and other organizations that you don't have to be in like a defense aerospace industry in order to be a secure organization, right? You should be able to have the same level of security if you're in any sort of vertical, and it should just be normalized. So, those were a lot of the things that they kind of putting them all together that I hope we all take away from this. And, as security champions, good luck, everyone. But
Yeah, I'll let Teresa give her last word.
Thank you. I always go back to the language that we use for cybersecurity and reframing it, reimagining it so that it is consumable. It's easy to understand, that it's accessible to people, and that they can bring it home and help their families.
Nice. Did I miss anybody? Thea, did you get a chance to? I think you did, right? Yeah, cool. So just want to wrap things up here. I think we had a ton of insights here. So thanks very much for Tony and Marcella, Thea, and Teresa as well, and Ryan. Lots of things to take away. Do watch for the recording that we'll be putting up in the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum community channel. A couple of quick housekeeping notes before we go. We do want to remind people we have some special quick start bundles for the ClickArmor product, which is our gamified cybersecurity awareness training and assessment platform. So we've got some great bundles here that you can reach out to Ryan and learn about. And we also want to announce that we're doing a special webinar next week with a partner of ours called Conceal.io. And it's actually for Carahsoft, which is a public sector vendor, reseller of software. So they put this opportunity for us to speak about empowering the human element. And we can talk about not only the training side, but also what can we do to bring detection and response closer to the end user rather than depending on the big scanners and gateways and things like that. When somebody actually makes a mistake in clicking, are there things we can do to sort of react to that immediately? And also empowering the employee to decide if they get feedback based on that click, what can they do or what should they do? So there's some really interesting discussion we're going to have next week. So feel free to sign up and join that live panel style discussion I'll be having with Craig Whetstone from Conceal.io. So with that in mind, thanks everybody for staying. I know we went a little bit over, but again, thanks to the whole panel and thanks to everybody for joining. we'll announce another upcoming session probably for late November, early December. So keep your eyes open. Thanks again, everybody, and take care. And until next time, my saying is engaged employees reduce risk. So take care. We'll talk to you later.